Good morning, everybody. Good. Get some energy in the room. Anyway, thanks to Nadir and obviously Thomas and Federica and the team for what undoubtedly, in my opinion, will be another amazing Global Fashion Summit. And I think looking at it over the 15 years that you've been around, you certainly can be proud of what you have achieved here. And your turnout, your presence, your most precious commodity, time, speaks for itself here. Last time I was here was actually 2019, believe it or not. I had just stepped down as the CEO of Unilever after 10 years. And that was actually your 10th anniversary as well by coincidence. I probably wore the same jacket then. I have to look at the photos because I'm not exactly a fashion guru, so I apologize for that. But anyway, as a Dutchman, it still feels good and it still looks reasonable, so I keep wearing it. That's what the industry needs. Anyway, at that time, we were talking about the need for transformative partnerships, truly transformative partnerships, if we wanted to address the most burning issues that we face currently, which are very clear, and you'll hear them over and over undoubtedly in every presentation, which is runaway climate change, devastating destruction of our biodiversity, and frankly, rising inequality. I talked at that time about the need to have courageous leadership, to have what I called regenerative leadership that really understands that ultimately you have to put yourself to the service of others. And by doing so, you're better off yourselves as well. That requires not only us doing things ourselves, but a certain humility to work together with others and form what I called at that time these transformational partnerships. The argument was very simple, to be honest. World Overshoot Day is July 25th, which is the day that we use up more resources than the world can replenish. Every day after, I would argue, we're actually stealing from future generations. I argued already at that time that our business model of CSR, corporate social responsibility, which is what most companies are in right now, is really only dealing with less bad. And when you've overshot these planetary boundaries to such an extent, less bad simply isn't good enough anymore. We really need to move very, very fast, if you want to what I call regenerative, restorative, reparative thinking. And that is what I call net positive. I actually felt so strongly about it that after I met you, we had COVID, and I locked myself up by force in my home at that time and wrote a book, Net Positive, How Courageous Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take. A little bit of a bizarre concept for many of the businesses. But reading that book, and it was number 3 on the Thinkers 50 list, and now in 16 countries translated, I think many people see that we do need to change that mindset. Less bad simply is not good enough anymore. So I'm glad to see that the global fashion agenda has equally embraced the net positive mindset, because frankly, we don't have a choice anymore. Since I came here 5 years ago, I just wanted to briefly observe 3 shifts that I've seen that I think concern you all. The first one is, and the fashion industry's challenge is there as well, is that humanity's problems actually over the last 5 years, if we like to, have gotten bigger, not less, despite all the work that you have done. COVID, economic recession, a more polarized world, rising geopolitical tensions, the wars that you're seeing, erosion, frankly, of democratic values in most countries in the world have all hijacked the corporate agenda. It's tough to be a CEO right now. I'm glad I got out in time, if I may be honest. I don't envy you all. But at the same time, despite the actions that most of you do here in many areas, and you're obviously the better part of the industry, otherwise you wouldn't have been there. Despite all the things that you're doing, we have actually failed to stem the threat of climate change, of inequality, of biodiversity destruction. In fact, regrettably, I would argue, and science would confirm, that we're moving in the wrong direction. There's a risk of a well-orchestrated political backlash that we're now seeing in ESG, the agenda clearly being hijacked. There's a risk that more and more companies are being pushed back in just compliance, that we take this extra ambition that we need now out of the equation. And that's probably the more dangerous thing at a time that we need more ambition. We certainly don't want the CEOs to show less of it. Only 15% of the Sustainable Development Goals are on track. As I said, inequality is rapidly rising, unfortunately. And climate change is on a trajectory of 2.5 to 2.9 degrees, levels that we don't know how to deal with. If you see the 1.5 degrees that we have today already, it's come quicker than science expected it. We thought we would be hitting that in 2030, 2035. And we're also surprised about the Earth's systems interdependence and negative feedback loops that we're starting to see. Johan Rockström, not far from here, was running the Stockholm Resilience Institute. He talked about 9 planetary boundaries, 6 of them which we've actually exceeded already. And frankly, climate science is an emerging profession, but the sad part is that any time new data comes in, it seems to be more urgent to take action than not. Every day now, you see droughts and floods or supply chain disruptions or lost crop. Every day, we're actually incurring billions of dollars of additional cost because of our inability to act at the scale and speed that is needed. Every day, unfortunately, livelihoods and regrettably many lives are lost, and many of them not appearing in the newspapers anymore. So for every industry, you're not an exception really, but for every industry, despite the great initiatives that many of you are having, we continue to create the problems at a faster pace than we apply the solutions. In other words, less bad is still bad. So I don't need to rattle more of the statistics, you'll hear enough of those. But the most important statistic is if we really don't step change and change, then there is a risk to the existence of the industry itself. I would argue a risk to humanity, but your industry is under a bigger threat than you probably might realize. Good for fashion, bad for the planet is not an option anymore. A system dependent on selling, frankly, more and more garments, which we use less and less, may I say, discarded with increasing frequency. Our famous take, make, waste model is really running out of steam. We can talk about it, we can be nice and show little examples, but the speed with which we're creating the problem far exceeds, once more, the speed with which we apply solutions. I know that most of you wish it wasn't this way. Nobody in their right minds, in my opinion, would design a system like this, especially as the costs that we're incurring now are significantly higher than what we actually have to invest in finding the solutions. That's why I believe it's the biggest business opportunity of the century if we would come together in a different way, if we would understand that as far as the future of humanity is concerned, we shouldn't be competing, but we should be cooperating. In fact, you're getting the signals from customers, from consumers, from employees, from others in the value chain that this really honestly needs to stop. Trust is being eroded faster than you probably realize. So my message there is really the bar needs to be set much higher. If any of you is sort of comfortable with what you're doing, you're not in the right space. If you're uncomfortable and you don't quite know how to get there, you might be getting closer than to where you need to be. The second observation is that without any doubt, I'm proud of what you're doing. The fashion industry is doing more than ever. There's quiet, diligent work being done by many companies in the room. New partnerships are being formed to get to breakthrough innovations that we're thinking. Many of the things that you're talking about were probably unthinkable a decade ago. Renewable alternatives are being developed for things like spandex. Mushroom is replacing leather. Bacteria are replacing toxic dyes. Wood pulp, as you've heard with Fatih a minute ago, transformed into fibers and fabric. So the solutions are out there. I don't think we need to invent much more. In fact, you are committed to some extent. 500 companies have done the science-based targets. There are 2,000 companies waiting to be qualified. When I stood here in 2019, there were only 12. So you're moving, and I applaud you. I applaud you for your ambitions. I applaud you for your innovations. I applaud you even more for your actions. But we do need a firm realization that our progress is still being outpaced by our problems. Without the recognition that we really still have this growing gap, we will not get the desired results. More than ever, what is needed is higher ambition, stronger coalitions, stretching targets, truly transforming partnerships, and yes, much stronger advocacy to ensure that we get the right policies in place and take care of the still too many free riders in this industry. My third observation is a very simple one, that you're at the moment right now where you're facing an increasingly stark choice. Lead or be led. It's as simple as that. This year's theme, Unlocking the Next Level, is actually a good theme because it's a clear signal that extraordinary actions are needed for all of us to be leaders. Trust, frankly, has worn thin. Trust that the fashion industry can resist its own worst impulses. And so self-regulation is a style that I don't think will return anymore next season. The starting pistols have been fired on the regulatory framework. In fact, we're working hard in many of these areas. In some cases, the ink is already tough dry. You've seen the legislation in France, for example, to limit the impact of fast fashion. I personally welcome that. You see the EU regulation, which is accelerating at enormous pace. Transparency required on forced labor, product design, packaging, labeling, digital product passports. They're all in the make and they're all coming. And then you have the global agreements. Despite many things not working at a global level, we are working on things like the Montreal Biodiversity Framework, the High Seas Treaty, the Plastics Treaty is being negotiated now. And within all of that, fashion is increasingly under the microscope. Being cheap and consumers wanting it, I think is rapidly losing its validity as an argument. So how should your industry respond? How should our industry respond? I ask you the same question that I asked 5 years ago, and it's a very simple one. Do you care? Unlocking our own human awareness and transformation of ourselves is at the core of any corporate or systems transformation. My book's first chapter actually very simply starts with the question, do you care? Thinking back to compliance only or continuing to operate, we know what we know is the needed ambition is simply not the answer anymore. So if you do care, and if you want the fashion industry to survive, if you want the fashion industry to thrive on a living planet, then the rest, frankly, is quite straightforward. Hard work, but quite straightforward. Lead or be led. Lead with transparency. Set real targets that science demands. Too many of you are still setting targets that have been cleared by legal, by PR, by communications. Many of them already you know how to achieve, but they are targets not to lose. They're not targets to win. Set the targets that science demands. That's why we have science. Take responsibility for the total impact of your products. All consequences, intended or not. The time is over that you can outsource parts of your value chain and outsource your responsibilities at the same time. You know, will all this be difficult? Undoubtedly. But the uncomfortable truth for fashion and frankly for other industries is that there are links in your supply chains that frankly have gone unchecked far too long, that are your responsibility wherever you sit. We know that transparency drives trust. I was looking at Remake's brand accountability scorecard, which looks at traceability, wages, raw materials, environmental justice, governance, commercial practices, and the list goes on. It shows, and that's just publicly available data on which we have to base our judgments, that the average accountability and transparency score from individual fashion companies was 14 points out of a scale of 100. Even the best in class that you celebrate here have a score of around 40. That score hasn't moved, by the way. You'd expect it to move up. The second thing, next to leading on transparency, is to really lead on collaborative partnerships, building stronger, longer-lasting relationships throughout your value chain. Most of your issues are in scope 3 and beyond. I haven't talked of the issues beyond. My book talks about scope 4, 5, and 6. Look at that. The greater the trust, the more your values are aligned, and the more progress will be made. The more resilient your value chains will be as well. This, as we've seen with climate change, with geopolitical tensions, etc., with economic ups and downs, is a very unstable value chain. Very unstable value chain. Your suppliers need that consistency. They need that support, that trust, that understanding that you're aligned around these values of what you want to achieve. It's the only way to unlock the money needed to transform. You'll see some collective partnerships emerging. Some of them we'll talk about on the panel, like the Renewable Energy Initiative or the Future Supplier Initiative. but far more is needed. If I look at some of the other industries which have equal challenges, how they are forming first mover coalitions or high ambition coalitions, frankly, we have our job cut out still. The third thing, and final, is lead on positive advocacy here. More regulation is coming, that's certain. Don't view them as a handcuff or restricting your business. See it actually positively as a mechanism to drive the fashion industry to new heights, to move the floor up faster, to eliminate the irresponsible free riders. We need that positive advocacy to bring everybody to the table, to collectively work on a better system, develop regulatory frameworks that work for everybody. I like politicians, we need them. I like some of them. We need them, but they can't do it alone. And if you let it to them and be on the defensive or receiving end, you'll create more work than what you're looking for. So the metamorphosis of this industry is required. From fast fashion to slow fashion, from wasteful to circular, from destructive to regenerative, from business as usual to net positive. And yes, there's one other element, which is that the value distribution that you have across the value chain needs to be more equitable and just. Not different from our food systems, by the way, we are working. Get and find ways to get more money up in the value chain for the farmers, for the textile workers, for the indigenous people in your value chain, for the communities in which they live and work. Any system where too many people feel they're not fully participating or are being excluded will ultimately rebel against itself. 8 out of 10 fast fashion companies in your industry are not paying livable wages right now. My simple question is, do you want that to happen to your children or grandchildren? If your answer is yes, keep going. If your answer is no, then simply apply the golden rule. Do unto others, do unto others, and in this case, the planet, as you want to have done unto yourselves. I've always taken that point of view in running Unilever. I wouldn't want my children to be in slave trade, in child labor, in sex trade. So I fight hard to ensure that it's not in our value chain either. I don't want women to be discriminated in the value chain. I want them to have equal opportunities, just like people of disability or different sexual orientations. So I fight hard to make that possible. By being silent, by keeping your eyes closed, by accepting these standards, you become complicit to the same cancer that is undermining the very existence of human beings in the first place. I cannot be stronger here. Let me be clear though, the business opportunities that this shift that is required represents are frankly unparalleled. If you harness that collective power, you will unlock more value than you've seen in the history of fashion. So I hope that if I'm back here, perhaps in 5 years' time, and obviously you want to have me back, what will I actually be saying? Well, will we have solved all of the problems I talked about? Probably not. That's a too short a time frame. But I do hope that we will be able to say that at this pivotal moment, when everything was on the line, when the fate of humanity was at stake, that the fashion industry decided to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I frankly believe you can, and I frankly believe you will. I'd like to end with the quote from Nobel Prize winner Wangari Maathai. She passed on, but she was actually from Kenya. And she said it very well when she said that in the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called upon to shift to a new level of consciousness, what she called to reach a higher moral ground. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot find a better time than now. Thanks for your time.